2 of you don't want to cut that.
You good? We live.
Yeah. So we want to talk about a little bit about Central Texas basketball as we cut in on the holiday or ending off the holiday, Thanksgiving. Hope everybody had a good break. Got a chance to see a lot of basketball. And really this topic here, we want to cover the last month, the last 3 weeks of basketball for the month of November as we kicked off the season in week 1 with a really good event hosted by Antonio Castillo and his staff, Alamo City Hoops. They put together a really good event. The Alamo City Hoops Classic in week 1 was able to see a lot of quality matchups head to head. And then also week 1 also had the Concordia showcase out in Austin, which was really good to go out and go see a couple of high profile matchups between a couple of teams that we figure to be in the mix in the very end when it's all said and done. So what do you have? I know we talked a little bit about what you had seen. I know we had talked a little bit about the Spurs event. I was able to see you there covering some kids there. So tell me your take, what you're excited about going into today.
Yeah, mainly just talking about the events and the players, So like you mentioned, wanted to just take a minute and talk about basketball, talk about high school basketball, what's going on here in San Antonio. So, don't really have too much of a formal script or anything. Just want to, talk basketball and talk about what we liked and what we saw over the past couple of weeks.
Absolutely. So I'll get us started. With that being said, for those that didn't see the previous episode, we talked about a couple of players and we talked about a couple of teams that we felt like were going to get off to a good start or that will probably be there from start to finish. So with that being said, week 1, the Alamo City Hoops Classic that we talked about had several matchups. Several teams came in from Austin, had a couple that came in from Houston, and then they had one group came in from Dallas, Naaman Forest, who played really well. Had several kids, college level prospects on that group that looked really good. Some kids that stood out for me, teams that stood out for me, and one of probably the better matchups in the entire tournament, Antonian versus Cole. It's always good to see when you have 2 state champions. And in Antonian's case, they had won 2 out of the last 3 years. Cole is back-to-back, trying to repeat again, have most of their core back. So it was really good to see both of those teams go head-to-head.
And when was that game? Because I remember, wasn't that like a 1-point game?
It actually went to overtime, and it was November the 12th, actually, the first day of the tournament. So it was a really good good game to see, really good for the tournament itself and really good for the city and for the area, being the level of competition that both of those teams bring out. Antonia is one of the teams that we said will be there toward the end right now. They're 10-0. If you look at them on film, if you look at them in person, they're not necessarily always going to pass the eye test in terms of kids that jump out of the gym or extreme size. But one of the things that I talked about before with that group in our previous episode was how they are well coached. They're well coached. Rudy Bernal, Herbert Jackson, a number of those guys do a great job. Bob Bersenio, all of those guys have been around the game for a number of years, and they understand levels of play, and they understand how to get the most out of their kids. And so that's the type of coaching staff that they have over there. And so whoever walks through the door over at Antonia, they're going to have those kids well prepared, although they do have some pretty good players. And Santiago Ochoa, guard, really good size, lefty, wound up winning the tournament MVP, played well that entire weekend. And, you have Xavier Martinez, who is a table setter, but he is tough as nails. I mean, he makes plays for them, whether scoring the ball or setting somebody else up to score. So, he's one that is definitely one that needs to be getting more college consideration. And then you have sophomore Isaiah Fox, who they have that can really put the ball in the basket from multiple areas on that team. Decent athlete, moves around well. And of course, like I said earlier, with Xavier being able to table set for a lot of those guys and put them in good situations, they're really good. And then you have Cole on the opposite side, who has, under the radar kid, who another one that needs to be getting more college consideration is Trey Blackmore, who has been shooting the cover off the ball, playing really well for that particular team, along with Incarnate Word signee Silas Livingston. So they do a really good job, and then they got a junkyard dog in Dre, who makes a ton of plays for them, allows Trey and Silas to be who they are. And so they actually have a formidable roster that will probably be there in the end for their group. I know that they split over the weekend. They went to Dallas, lost a tough one, but then came back and won a game yesterday against San Angelo Central. So they're well coached as well by Coach Cantu. So they do a really good job over there. You know, he's been doing things. You know, he's a big game hunter. He goes out searching for teams to keep his teams prepared because his end game is to try to win another state championship. So respect that team, respect those players, and what they do over there.
So that game is going back to November 12th, almost 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
What was that? That was part of a tournament?
Correct. Alamo City Hoops.
Okay. So they had a high school event tournament.
Mm-hmm.
And then what, because there's been a lot of basketball.
There's been some good regular season matchups that have taken place. And then, like I said, this is one of the better times of year for me. Not only does holiday time kick in, but then you have tournaments from, like I said, here in the city, but then you also have some that have taken place in Austin. You've had some in Houston. You've had some really good events taking place in Dallas that some of the San Antonio area and Austin area teams have participated in. So it just that opportunity for teams to go out and go get really good evaluations of themselves before they get close to district play. And we've also had a pretty good event here with the Northeast Northside tournament as well.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I really liked. I don't know, maybe just the matchups weren't like previous years, but the tournaments have been almost more exciting than, because, during the weeks, they only play 2 games a week.
Mm-hmm.
But in the tournament, like this past weekend, I saw more than 10 games of good matchups within the span of, a few days.
Correct.
And good matchups.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the tournaments. I don't know why I just hadn't really noticed that until this year, but the tournaments are.
Obviously, last year, tournaments were out, and so the coaches did a pretty good job of setting up their schedules to try to get the most out of the schedule that they could in preparation for district play, just with the COVID and everything. But in previous years, South San has always had a good tournament. Northeast Northside has always been pretty good, although years and years ago, it was called the, I forget, it used to be one of the biggest classics in the area where we had, 40 to 60 teams, coming in from out of state all over the place, and so that tournament itself, Northeast Northside, is still a formidable tournament. Some really good teams were actually in there, had arguably one of the better 23 players in the country, and KJ Lewis was actually in that one, so they were able to draw them in. And then they had Straight Jesuit, who has a really good player, and Chase Posey on their roster, who was here for that one. They wound up winning it in overtime over Brandeis. Brandeis actually was up by 3 with a chance to win the game and left a kid wide open to tie the game up. But overall, it was a really good event. Like I said, players make events. And so when you actually have the type of teams that they actually had in there, that's what kind of rounded it out. But going back to the previous event that we were kind of talking about, not to get too far away from that, Austin St. Michael's came in with probably the biggest team or biggest lineup, in the entire event, when they have Mashai Hill and Josh Jones, who both come in at 6'8", 6'9", respectively. And then they got, a sophomore and Jamie Vincent, 2024 kid, that's a solid kid, up and coming, versatile. So they actually have a solid roster. I saw them play Steele. Like I said, a couple of Houston teams. Saw Brennan. Brennan looks really, really good. Although we talked about them, being really young in our previous episode, the thing about them is they're learning on the fly, but they're getting a lot done. And so it's going to be interesting to see what they're learning now, how they implement that, because their district actually kicks off in a couple of weeks. And so the fun is not going to slow down. It'll be, constant. And it's all about who can sustain, who can get a rhythm, get themselves, in a positive position for the second half of district as it rolls around, mid to late January and in early February.
Okay. So let's maybe break it down by the different tournaments. So we covered that one's that was on the 12th. What were some other ones? Because you've done a lot more traveling than me. The last tournament that I went to that I covered was the Spurs tournament,
right?
Which was just this past week. So what are we? Today's the 28th. So yeah, the 18th, 19th, and 20th.
We're going all the way back to November 13th. It was a really good event that Concordia put on in Austin, where you had several matchups. And the way that they actually set it up, it was actually Austin versus San Antonio. So it was like the best of both worlds for me, because you could get there at the beginning of the day and then watch games all throughout. And so
was this a high school event also?
Correct. And so they had games slated all the way from 8:30 in the morning all the way up until 9 o'clock that night, where they had some matchups, that were really good. I know capping off the night was Cedar Ridge versus San Antonio Homes, which was really good. Preceding that was a really good one where they had Austin Westlake versus San Antonio Clark, and that actually was a rematch from last year's state semifinal.
So from in that Concordia tournament, what were some of the teams that were just in it? Can you just run through like some of the teams?
San Antonio Clark, Austin Westlake. You had Leander Rouse. You had Leander Glenn, San Antonio Brandeis. San Antonio Reagan actually played it on Friday night against Round Rock, and Round Rock wound up beating them in a close one. Let me see who else was there. O'Connor was there. O'Connor played against Leander Rouse, who we talked about being really, really good. Brandeis played against Dripping Springs. San Antonio Johnson was there. San Antonio Johnson has been playing, pretty good basketball. They got a young roster for the most part. They've been playing a lot without their best player, Kendall Dow.
What's wrong with him?
Tweaked his knee, but he should probably be getting back here within the next week or so. And so they should have him ready for the upcoming games that they have in preparation for district play. And so that puts them in a pretty good situation, being the fact that they've been able to either be in games or win games without arguably their best player, but definitely their best player. And so when they get him back, they'll be able to add, a little bit more power to the punch that they've already provided. They're getting a lot of quality play from a freshman, 6'5", Daryl Banks is doing some really good things. And then also Rizzo had a solid game for them the other day. So they're getting some quality production from those kids. So it's going to be interesting, as we get closer to that money time, as we like to call it, in the basketball world.
Nice. And then, so that's kind of the teams that were in that Concordia event. Or I call it the Concordia event, but I might be mispronouncing the name.
That's what it is. Yeah.
What did you see from that? Because I didn't attend that one. So what were some of your takeaways?
Was real impressed with the Leander Rouse group. They have size. They got a 2024 that really intrigued me. Jojo Moore, sophomore. They got a 23, Nazim Mahmood, who really, really scores the ball from multiple areas. Starting to do a lot more, putting it on the floor, was really aggressive that day, doing some good things, put their team, in some really good situations. Another 2024, Maury Haywood, was really, really good for them. And so I was impressed with just their entire roster. And then they got a Scopel kid who really shoots the skin off of it to try to space the floor out for a lot of those guys,
And this is Rouse we're talking about?
Yes. So I figured that they're going to be in the equation, as we start to look, getting closer to district play.
That's pretty good. Just real quick, I know a couple of the players on Rouse. You mentioned Nazar Mahmood.
Mm-hmm.
Seen him. He played with ASAC.
Played with ASAC a little bit, and then he finished the summer out with JL3.
So I've seen him in his game and how it's grown and improved. And I know he got some attention a little while ago. I don't know for what. Maybe just people starting to know who he is. But
he's starting to get quite a few Power 5 offers, and people that are really kind of noticing him put the ball in the basket and doing what he does. And so like I said, that's going to be a team that, teams will have to reckon with, when they play them. So it's a really good brand of basketball that they have going on up in the Austin area. And it's good for everybody to be able to kind of see it. And like I said, with the fact that the way Concordia had it set up, which was San Antonio versus Austin, it was the best of both worlds for me, for the simple fact I could kind of get in there and see multiple teams, but then also, some quality matchups who I feel like, in some cases are going to be some potential playoff type situations, being the fact that all of them in Region 4.
Another player on the Rouse team that I'm a little familiar with is Amari Haywood.
Played like a madman, was all over the glass, but then also did some things off the bounce, was able to get to the rim, scored it a lot, was really, really active, got in the passing lane, created turnovers for his team. I mean, he was really one that really kind of stood out just because his energy kind of got him going early on. Both teams were trying to fill each other out, but over the course of time, their athleticism and their size and their ability to be able to score the ball is really what the difference was. Although O'Connor played him tough, O'Connor was right there with him. Jalen Munoz had a really good game that day and did some really good things for them, and they were in it. Brett Jawasko does a really, really good job with that group. He always has them, in the thick of things, and that'll probably be another potential playoff team, as we start to shape out what districts are going to look like.
Nice. And I want to say on Rouse, do they also have Cole Andrew Heights? Does that name ring a bell?
Mm-mm.
Okay. I'm not sure if he's on Rouse or not, but I know he's an awesome player that I've seen a little bit of. But
the other kid that played really well for them, like I was saying, was JoJo Moore, sophomore, 2024, about 6'5", 6'6", long, wiry. You can kind of just see his body starting to mature. He's starting to do, more things. And he's going to be one of those kids that is going to be on quite a few radars here over the next couple of months.
Not to bounce back and forth, but Amari Haywood, last time I saw him here in San Antonio, he's like because number one, he's like isn't he a 2024 or something like that? So young, he was just a freshman. I think when I saw him, like 6 foot, maybe a little bigger than 6 foot, but he's big. He's like kind of stocky, but he was bouncy.
Very bouncy.
And it's like, wow, he's like, it's always interesting when you see big, kind of stocky, thick players like that can get to the rim, dunk.
Yeah.
So
coming into his own, playing under control, really kind of understood what he could and couldn't do. And people that have a really good feel along with the athleticism that you're speaking about, those are some of the things, he kind of showcased on that particular day. And like I said, he really was one of the difference makers along with JoJo, really kind of helping open that game up. Although Nazir Mahmoud had a really, really good game shooting the basketball wise, those guys really were the table setters and set everything else up.
Cool. All right. Well, that was kind of a lot about Rouse and that Concordia event. Anything else from that event? Any other schools you want to talk about? I know that we talked about a lot about Austin, and we talked about Johnson as well from San Antonio.
Johnson was really good. Austin, Westlake, and Clark went down to the wire. Clark wound up winning that one by 2, and what some believe a controversial call, although it was a really, really well played basketball game from the perspective of Westlake got out early, as they have the ability to do. They're well coached by Coach Lucero. They do some really good things. Connor McManus and Donovan Santoro, who were both college level prospects, really got off to a good start in that one. But Clark was able to kind of slow some things down. In large part, not only was Jordan Mason starting to get comfortable, but Ethan Crowley played big. And, I mean, I'm saying that with all sincerity. I mean, he's a big kid. He's a load. Every bit of 6'6", 6'7", and about 240, 250. That's just hard to move down there. And so once he kind of gets going, they got him involved early on. Westlake got caught up, with some problems matching up with him. And so he was able to get some good looks just to slow things down for Clark, because they got down by as much as maybe 10 or 12. But then with him scoring easy inside, he settled the game down for him, and they were able to get back in it. And then from that point, it was kind of a back and forth type situation. They go up maybe 4 or 6, and then Westlake made some plays late. And the game is tied with 7 seconds to go. And then that's when the controversy kind of came in, because it was a really, really physical game on both sides. The officials, in that particular situation kind of allowed them to play. But in this case, at the end, Clark got a favorable call and went to the foul line, made both free throws, and then came down. And then Westlake came up empty.
So this Westlake team is the same team that had KJ Adams on it last year, right?
Correct.
Who is going to be playing at Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
He was a lot of attention on him, but now that he's gone, right? He's no longer there. You mentioned Connor and Donovan. Tell me a little bit about Connor McManus, because I've seen him maybe a year or so ago.
Can really shoot the basketball, and I mean he's the one that really kind of makes that team go. Although like I said earlier, Lucero is such a good coach. He puts all of those kids in some really good situations, and so they all like each other, which is important. Especially for them to be able to flourish and do the things they're going to do. Losing KJ Adams, and then they lost a couple other kids off of that roster that are also playing well. I think one kid is also at Southern New Hampshire. We got another kid at Southern Nazarene. So they got a couple of other kids that are playing college level basketball. So to lose those type of kids, to pick right back up where they left off, says a lot about their program, says a lot about their coaching staff, and says a lot about their kids. But they'll be a regional team, and we'll just kind of leave it at that for right now, just because there are teams that match up well with them, but then also they pose problems for a lot of teams within the region. And so it'll be interesting to see once playoff time kind of comes out, how the brackets kind of shape out, who's going to match up with who, for the simple fact they pose problems for the entire region with the way that they shoot the basketball. Connor shoots it from multiple spots, deep, clean, quick release. Definitely a college level prospect. Can really stretch the defense. Donovan Santoro is another kid that really stretches the defense and allow those kids to really kind of space the floor and do things that, makes them comfortable.
Yeah, and I've seen actually both of them, Donovan and Connor, because they played for THP.
Mm-hmm.
And very good program. So I'm glad to see both of them doing well now that they're a little bit older.
Absolutely. Really kind of coming into their own.
All right. Well, do you have any other teams from Concordia before we move on to the next event, or?
Let's see. So for them, another group that really kind of stood out later in the day, Cedar Ridge was solid. Marcel Bryant, 6'7", 215, 220. Just
Marcel Bryant?
Yeah, just
okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with him.
Physical specimen that's really kind of coming into his own, runs the floor, does so many other different things well. And, so he's one that's been garnering a little attention,
and where's he
from several schools at Cedar Ridge.
Cedar Ridge. Okay.
Yes. And so they played against Holmes to kind of cap the night off. He got off to a good start, had his group in a really good situation, so, and I figure for him to start picking up, some offers here, pretty soon with how well, he's playing, and then also his skill level and his body. I mean, it's a college-ready body that he already has.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Cool. And I guess just for that Concordia event, just in general, because that's a good. Do you want to talk a little bit about the event itself, like the organizer?
So it's been going on. Stan Bonowitz Jr., who is from San Antonio, has a really good relationship with a lot of the schools here. Also, obviously, is the assistant AD there in Austin at Concordia as well. And so not only is he the head basketball coach, he also is the AD. So he kind of serves as a role of being able to put together an event like this, to be able to go out and go get quality talent, quality schools. Like I said, Reagan was in it. They played on Friday against Round Rock, which is another really good team. They have a really a couple of good players on their group with Reese Miller,
Mm-hmm.
and then they also really shoots the basketball. And then Jalen Brooks is really shooting the cover off of it. He had 46 a couple of nights ago. So he's really putting up big numbers, drawing a lot of attention. People are starting to try to call about him and trying to see just what level they feel like he's at and stuff like that. But Reagan dropped that ball game. So those two will be playoff teams in my eyes. And so you had that type of matchup, and then you go into Saturday with the type of teams that we've already talked about were already there. So his role was very simple, just to call out, find those teams who are going to provide quality matchups for each other, and then, make the schedule work.
Yeah, and recently in the paper, I saw Coach Bonowitz. I guess he was in some Hall of Fame maybe
That's
here.
him. Yes.
And then also an interesting fact about him is he was a leading scorer at East Central or something.
Watched him grow up since he was this tall, and so to see the whole maturation process from him as a player to a coach and what he's evolving into now, just as a person. I mean, a really, really good person. I mean, for him to achieve Hall of Fame status, I mean, that's one, to kind of just set him apart from everything else. But then two, to kind of watch him come up from the youth. I mean, me being an East Central grad and watching him, come up and doing the things that they were able to do in 95 was really special to see. And I mean, they have not only that, people really don't know the coaching tree that kind of spun off of Coach Bonowitz Sr. Myself, being in education and coaching for over 20 years. Then we're talking about Stan Bonowitz Jr. You have Dante Mathis, that's now at Texas State. Steve Lutz, who's now the head coach at Texas A&M Corpus. Kevin Rice, that's coaching at Midland. So it's a long lineage of individuals who have taken on the responsibility of coaching from that era, if you will. So it's been really good. And I know a couple of other members off of that 95 team started coaching, but have moved on doing other different things. So I want to say from a coaching aspect, I named off maybe 5 or 6 right there, but there was probably maybe 10 or 12 that at some point in time were coaching.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, it's good when you have quality people putting on quality events with quality teams and quality matchups, and that the intent, is all good. So
Right, absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely. So I guess this segment here, this part of it, we can kind of talk about teams, and then we'll go on to players for the month of November. So
do you want to
in our previous episode,
are we going to talk about the Spurs tournament at all?
Absolutely.
Okay, that was the one that I went to, and basically I live streamed the whole thing, so I saw every game on the main court, and I was impressed with it. And I saw you there courtside also. So I guess for starters, on that Spurs tournament, I think this is the first time they had done something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the teams that were in it, I think there was a total of maybe 16 or so, but
had 16 boys, 16 girls teams.
So Brennan was there,
Mm-hmm.
East Central,
Mm-hmm.
Reagan,
Mm-hmm.
Churchill,
Mm-hmm.
John Paul II,
Mm-hmm.
Steele,
Mm-hmm.
Bernie Champion,
Mm-hmm.
DeSoto,
Mm-hmm.
Colleen Shoemaker,
Mm-hmm.
Taft,
Yep.
Brack was there, Breckenridge,
Mm-hmm.
and Warren.
Mm-hmm.
There were some other teams there as well, but those are the ones I'm more familiar with.
Absolutely.
Just to give them a shout out, Laredo Nixon was there, Dripping Springs,
Mm-hmm.
and the Anderson Trojans from Austin. I think that's everybody. Bel Air Cardinals as well.
Mm-hmm. Jacoby Cole, Bel Air, is a high-profile prospect in the 23 class, and so he's one that everybody, was there really kind of seeing how that was going to match up. I was really eager to see when I saw the matchups unfold and to see him and Jalen Crocker Johnson actually go head-to-head against one another, which was a really, really good ball game between Bel Air and San Antonio Warren. That was taking place over there at Harlan. That was the other site outside of the AT&T Center. And both of those kids kind of went at each other, being Bel Air getting the best of them, winning the game late. But Jalen Crocker is really, really, really coming into his own, doing some really, really good things, helping that team. And they've been playing without one of their other better players who they're going to be getting back here pretty soon as well. So it's going to be interesting to see that Warren team, now that some of those other role players really were able to step up and do some really good things, now have to now get another kid back that's going to add, another dimension to their team. It's going to be really good.
Yeah. On the topic of Warren, One game that I really liked that I saw there was Warren versus Churchill, and the matchup between Jalen and the Warren guys. Also on Warren, I want to give a shout out to Cole Romister. That's the other 6'5" kind of big guy.
Mm-hmm.
Him and Jalen. But they matched up against Macaulay over at Churchill,
Mm-hmm.
and I was very, very impressed with Macaulay Roberts. Make sure I'm pulling up his name, so make sure I'm pronouncing it right. But yeah, Macaulay Roberts.
Good athlete, has some intangibles, but when you start talking about what Jalen Crocker Johnson brings to the table, it's a different league.
But I know, and I know what you're saying. That Warren game, Macaulay, he carried Churchill, and he went back and forth. He had some dunks in that game. He had some threes. Like, for one man to have to play against Jalen, Cole, and then Ferguson also, that's three big guys. Macaulay was able to, have his team hang in there, and they lost that game. But it was I'm trying to pull up what the final score was, but it was like less than 10-point difference, I think.
And Roberts will have that type of season for them. What you're sharing with me is not a surprise. The fact that he comes from a program that he plays with during the summertime that demands that. They're going to compete. They're going to go out. They're going to do those little things. And like I said, he's a college-level prospect with his abilities and things that he can definitely do. Is he going to find the right school? Is he going to find that right system to be able to kind of help him flourish and continue to grow, which is in some areas where he needs to, is really going to kind of be up to him. But when we start talking about Crocker arguably was the second best, if not the third best player in the entire tournament, just based on what he brings to the table and the fact that the other team knows that's what he's going to do, and he still delivers.
So
that's how you know when a kid has really arrived, when you're affecting the game in so many other different areas. He not only was scoring the ball, but the way he's rebounding the basketball, the way he's defending, doing things with much better control than I've seen him in the past. Before, I would see him still do some of those things on a frequent basis, but he would also struggle just from a control standpoint. Now he's playing with a lot better pace and understanding about what he's trying to do, which makes him extremely tough. And then when you have teams game planning for you and they still don't stop you, you're getting close to where you want to be.
And this is Macaulay Roberts we're talking about?
No, we're talking about Jalen Crocker Johnson.
Oh, Jalen. Okay. My bad. I was multitasking. So I wanted to pause you on something. We said one of the top three players of the whole tournament, Jalen Crocker Johnson. All right. So, did you maybe make a list of like your top players from the tournament? We don't have to go into that depth right now, but I wanted to pause you because I wasn't sure if you actually had something or if you were just kind of
It's kind of on the brain, and being the fact that I watched multiple matchups with several different players and teams, for me, it's always, if I'm going to talk to college coaches, I have to be able to provide them the data and the information based on who they're playing against and who they went up. So like I said, when I saw them on the schedule against Bel Air, Jacoby Cole, okay, they're going to say, okay, well, how was this matchup? So I have to be able to provide that type of insight. Jacoby Cole was off the chart. You started.
Where are they from? I'm not familiar with that name.
Bel Air out of Houston.
Okay.
So you really started to see him first game or so. He was kind of just coasting, and so I'm like, nah, he's gonna have to show me more. And I really wasn't totally impressed until the second or third time I saw him. Actually, it was later on in that game he started to turn it up because his team started to struggle a little bit, and you can kind of tell that if he didn't turn it up, they were going to get in some trouble, and he knew that. So that's the instincts and the IQ and the feel that players have. Sometimes they kind of know when to turn it on and what they have to do, and so he did that. So he definitely was up there in terms of him and the way he impacts the overall game. So you have him.
And I want to pause you. So Jacoby Cole, is this the 6'8" guard we're talking about? Junior?
Correct.
The junior 6'8" guard? Okay. That's cool. I hadn't heard his name, but to be a guard at 6'8" and still kind of young, maybe it's good to know.
Yeah, no, definitely. But then not only that, just his overall demeanor, competitive, but really kind of just stayed within himself. So those two kind of really stood out. In that particular tournament, Antoine Gonzalez, clean shoemaker, was lights out the entire time. I mean, from start to finish, I think they played 5 or 6 games, and 4 of them he may have had 30. And for me, it's not about how you scored. Let's just say he was really, really efficient, because how you score does matter. But the efficiency is the big piece for me. How efficient are you? Because I've seen kids have to shoot 30 shots to get 30. That wasn't the case for him. I mean, he was well within the flow of the game. He wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary to try to just get shots up. Was solid on the defensive end, showcased some athleticism, getting in the passing lanes, was out on the open floor, finishing a little bit. So he's one that was up there in terms of productivity as far as being one of the better players in the event as well.
Oh yeah, I'm a fan of Antoine Gonzalez. They have him listed on the roster at like 6'1", you know, so when you see him, he's not as big as some of the other guys out there, but he's a playmaker.
Mm-hmm.
He will score. He has grit.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the great, probably the most hyped matchup that was there was the DeSoto versus Colleen Shoemaker.
Mm-hmm.
That was a great game. It ended 63-58. DeSoto winning that one.
Mm-hmm.
But in that game, Antoine had 23 points. So he was the leading scorer for Colleen Shoemaker. So probably say if you're looking at, you know, players, just from what I've seen for Colleen Shoemaker, Antoine is probably your guy from their roster right now.
No doubt about it. He's definitely the one that makes that train go over there. He did some really good things. It's funny that you mentioned, you know, DeSoto, and it's funny how everything kind of unfolded, because once you kind of got out of pool play, you then went into bracket play. So we saw a team in Brennan champion who was 0-2 at the time and was desperate for a win just to get into contention, knock off DeSoto, and due to tiebreakers, they wound up getting into the championship bracket. They're a championship bracket team, but of course their initial matchups affected them, you know, in certain ways, you know. But once they kind of settled down, they were able to do some really, really good things.
Yeah. And I want to pause you again on that in case people didn't hear about Bernie Champion beating DeSoto.
Beat the tournament champion. And so it was a format that they had set up, pool play. Pool play led to bracket play. And that's how that actually happened. And so I don't want to say a weird concept. You know, it's been known to happen, but normally to lose as early as or late as they did and then turn back around and then win everything, you know, it was very interesting. And they beat a really good Reagan team in overtime. You know, I was able to see some footage of that one and then kind of see, you know, that Reagan actually had a chance late to tie it up. You know, they're really, really getting good play out of Trey Thompson. I mean, I'm a big fan of his for the simple fact that he's a hard-nosed kid.
Before we dive into Reagan, can we backtrack to Champion DeSoto?
Go ahead.
So that game ended 54-49. And then just to give a shout out to some of the players on both sides, on the Bernie Champion side, and I'm going through some of my stats here. Looks like Braden Baum had 18 points that game. Braxton had 10 points, and Jesse Pert had 13 points for Champion. And then for DeSoto, Amir Wall, who I just learned about. Real impressed with him. He had 6 points. Looks like the leading scorer from that game was Gerald Dixon with 11. And then Kai Chester, he had 10 points. And there's another player that I met, but he didn't do so well that game. So
for DeSoto, they're not necessarily a team that has a lot of high-profile kids or a true go-to guy. Excuse me. They just play hard, and they do whatever it takes, to ultimately come away with the win. And so it was really kind of hard to really kind of pinpoint on who they were trying to feature or who was going to really be the key factor in their games. But as a whole, they were a really solid team. They were the beneficiary of some early matchups. So I thought when they played Bernie Champion, that was the first legitimate game they had to play in the tournament. And then, of course, they kind of said, okay, we lost this one. Let's regroup. And you started to see the grit that you talked about, some of the other things that those kids are capable of doing. That started to come out in bracket play. And then, of course, leading them to the championship. In a really close, well-competitive, hard-played game, in that sense. We talked about Trey Thompson. We also talked about – we didn't talk about –
going on to Reagan,
right,
leading into Reagan. For those who don't know, and, I didn't really – not for any reason in particular, but I didn't really pay that much attention to Reagan up until now. I didn't realize how good of a team they were. Solid.
They get well coached by.
They are a great team. They are tough.
Coach Hurst has been around for a while and gets the most out of kids. Gets a lot out of Jackson. Gets a lot out of Trey. He gets a lot out of that entire group. They kind of understand their roles, who they are, what they're to do to be successful. Nobody really kind of gets into the. Trying to outdo one other person, this or that and the other. There's some other teams, kind of deal with from an ego standpoint. They get locked in and, like I said earlier, they're well coached. Their staff, understands, who can do what and when, and they know what buttons to press, and they get a lot out of them. So it doesn't surprise me that they were there in the championship, with Trey, being as hard-nosed as he is and competitive. He kind of sets the tone, and then everybody else kind of feeds off of that. And they kind of know who they are. The old cliche, we are who they thought they were. Well, they know who they are, and they get off the bus with that, where they don't try to do too much. They stay within themselves, and that's why they will be, in the picture to see whether or not they make the playoffs if they're one of the top 4 teams in that district.
Well, yeah, from what I've seen, they have a solid roster. They've got size. They've got guards. Reagan, they play organized basketball. They make plays happen. And like you said, from an efficiency standpoint, they hit whenever they're supposed to take their shots. So, they're a solid, tough team that doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Some of the players that I want to kind of give a shout out to in order that kind of caught my attention from this tournament. Number 1 is Jackson Adams. He's 6'4" guard.
Solid player.
2022. Very tough. He's 6'4", can easily dunk the ball, can score, leading scorer most of the time. Or actually, Trey might be leading scorer most of the time. But Jackson is right up there with him. He's tough. He's got attitude in a good way where he's not going to let nobody push him around. So I'm a big fan of Jackson Adams. I also like Luke Mills. They have him listed at 6'5", but he's probably taller than that.
Solid.
He can get to the basket. He can, he can get to the rim.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, Trey Thompson. That is one under. I don't know if he's under recruited or whatever.
Lubbock Christian getting a steal out of him. I said that in our previous episode.
He's already committed somewhere? Okay.
Lubbock Christian. So he's going there. And like I said in the previous episode, he's kind of one of those kids, as a coach's dream, where you kind of want a kid like that on your team. He doesn't mind getting dirty, taking charges, making sure everybody's getting touches where they need touches. That's the key to being a point guard. It's one thing when people are saying, okay, well, I'm the point guard. Okay, well, who else are you bringing to the party? That's for me. Who else do you bring to the party? Who else are you helping get better? And how are you helping them get better? So for him, it's distributing the basketball, knowing where to get him the basketball, and okay, oh, by the way, you back off me or you give me opportunities, I'm going to finish as well. And so, he's a kid that definitely deserves where he's going to school at. Like I said, Lubbock Christian is getting a really, really solid player.
And he's a playmaker and he's a scorer. And just to give him his props, I know that he facilitates and passes the ball, but homeboy's got some handles too.
Oh, yeah.
He's got game. And in that game versus DeSoto, the last play of the game, they gave it to Trey. And I made a highlight video about it, a little clip. And if you see Trey, he got the handles. He goes through 2 big defenders. He can get to the basket. He barely missed it, but he was spinning and everything. I'm like, that kid can play, man. He's a hooper.
He's a next level player for sure. And there's several that are like him in the area that are under recruited, as you were alluding to earlier.
Because he's smaller.
Well, but I would say the pedigree is set for him in the fact that I've seen him not only in Coach Hurst's system, and Coach Hurst is tough himself. So he's going to demand a lot, especially out of that point guard position, because that's the engine to the train. But even the youth program that he plays with, in the grassroots situation, playing with hard work and teams like that, they've put him in those type of situations. And going back to our previous episode that we talked about situations that kids are being put in, this was one that he stayed where he was supposed to and was allowed to grow. Coach Hurst, understanding who he is, put him in those type of situations as well. And so now you're seeing a kid just flourish.
Yeah.
It's important. It is very important.
Yeah, that Reagan team in general, the kids all have a great attitude. Coaches are very nice and they love their team. And,
barring injury or something crazy happening, they'll be there fighting for a playoff spot.
Nice. All right. And then just still, I guess, on that Spurs tournament, some of the other teams that were in there, we talked about Reagan, we talked about Bernie Champion, DeSoto, Warren. Let's see, who else? We haven't really talked that much about maybe Brennan or East Central.
Talked a little bit about Brennan and their youth and how they're coming along. They're winning some games.
We got Steele also.
Yeah, and so it's ironic that they played each other. They're going to play each other again this week. So now we got somewhat of a round robin between those two teams playing. So they played each other.
Brennan and East Central?
Brennan and Steele.
Oh, Brennan and Steele.
So Brennan and Steele played where Brennan, for the most part, is in control. Cam Cowgill is shooting it. And, I mean, he was one of the additions that they were hoping to get. He started off the season injured a little bit. And so getting him back healthy has helped that group space the floor out. Kid with a quick trigger. Team knows how to find him in areas where he's at. He moves well without the ball, and he doesn't need much space to get it off. Making really good decisions. Then they got another youngster in Kingston Flemings who really understands how to play. I mean, he's a mid to high major prospect when it's all said and done. With the way that he plays the game, he understands every aspect about being a point guard. Going through some things that most freshmen are going to go to, but the fact that he's in the fire and, again, being in the right situations from where he's come from, situations that he's been in up until this point has kind of prepared him for that. And so that entire team, and they actually have a couple of other young ones that are out injured right now. Deion Williams has been playing roughly at about 60 or 70%. He tweaked his ankle in that tournament. And actually he tweaked it in the Alamo City Hoops tournament. So it slowed him a little bit, and they've been kind of, slow playing and making sure that he's coming back fully healthy. But he's another piece that when he's going, he's going. I really like how he's blossoming into a player. His motor is right where it needs to be. He's been really active, starting to expand more of his game, doing more with it on the perimeter, putting it down on the floor, able to hit the mid-range shots. And he's so active. He's like a ball magnet, always around him. He's a double-double machine. So they're playing well, and it's ironic that in that particular game we're talking about, Brennan's up maybe double digits, and Steele slowly but surely crawls back into it and takes the lead. They have a rematch coming up on Tuesday, and so it's interesting to see how that one's going to play out. As most teams may encounter, coming into tournament play, sometimes you may see somebody, and in the course regular season matchup, you already had them on there. You hope that it doesn't happen. And that's the reason why you have some teams just go completely out of city to prevent from having to play somebody that they've already seen. But they're going to have to, like I said, play again, and then we'll see how that one actually turns out.
Yeah, that was a good matchup. At that Spurs tournament, Steele, when they played Brennan, Steele won that game 73-65.
Mm-hmm.
They beat Brennan.
He was second half.
On the steal side of things, and just kind of looking at some of the top scorers, Steele got the victory on that. In that game, the leading scorer was Eric Brown, followed by Max George, who I didn't really know that much about, but he was sinking shots.
Max has been over at Basis Private School for the last year. Came over to Steele and is now really evolving into a player that can knock down shots, adds a dimension to their team that before they didn't have, can help space the floor. Eric Brown is really coming into his own. Saw him play again yesterday. Definitely a college level prospect. Where is really truly dependent on him and how much more he puts into it. But he's definitely doing some things off the bounce. His athleticism translates, his range translates, his defensive ability in the way that I love guards rebound the basketball. He's doing that. Things that college coaches are going to want to see. What else are you doing? Yeah, you're scoring 15, 16, 17 a night. What else are you doing? In this particular case, he knows he's got to go to the glass because they're, not as big as they've been in the past, although they do have some length. He's got to, fill out the stat sheet in that area. So he's really starting to blossom, starting to do some things that make sense for college coaches to pay more attention to. So he's definitely one that is not just some 1 or 2 night fluke. I think he will have, a pretty solid year, for the remainder of the year. Another kid on that particular roster, Jonah Johnson, who is playing really well too. Really like him being a 2024 at 6'4", 6'5", can really shoot the basketball with really good range, really quick release, and has some athleticism to him that, I'm just kind of waiting for him to kind of let come out a little bit. But, that's a team there that's going to be interesting to see how they progress coming forward.
Yeah. And going back to some of the Steele players, the third leading scorer was Cameron Roper. Going back to Eric Brown, I think that he is one heck of an athlete. My opinion, any coach that's looking for a 6'2" guard, you don't get more athleticism, you don't get more pure muscle than from someone like Eric.
Well, it takes much more than that, and that's where the levels come into play at. So that's why I said it depends on what level. Some of that is going to depend on Eric. He has to be able to show on a consistent basis that he can do X, Y, and Z. What X, Y, and Z is for those college coaches, that's up to them to figure out. Is he a college level prospect? There is no doubt about it. He definitely should be getting more consideration than what he's getting right now. We have several kids that kind of fit that bill here in a particular area for a variety of different reasons, whether it be because of who they played club ball with or situations, positions that they've been in, much like we were talking about the previous kids that we were talking about, situations. It really matters. And I think that that's really the deal with him is that coaches haven't seen him in positions that he may play for them. And so now—
You're saying maybe because of the circuit that he played on or something?
Absolutely. There's no question about it, because he was in some unfortunate situations. And what I mean when I say that, he didn't always play where he was going to play position-wise. And then, of course, some teams that he was on wasn't really where he needed to be. And so when he finally made the right decision to go where he ended the summer with, probably one where he probably could have started off with, because the coach had a better understanding of how he plays. It's so critical for coaches and players to kind of be on the same page as far as where the players should be playing at, and the coach kind of sees that from a player development standpoint.
You're talking about the actual position on the court. When you say
Absolutely, that's correct. Yes, it matters. And I'll give you an example. You can have a team full of point guards, but ultimately somebody's going to have to play off the ball. So if somebody's playing off the ball, is that truly where he's going to play it in college? So if he's never put in that situation, how is a college coach going to ever see him in that situation? So now I don't know if he can actually do that. So now they're having to dig for film, or they're having to do extra work to try to see, can this kid really do that? Or they're trying to sell themselves. Oh, by the way, I've seen Johnny over there. Johnny plays this position. I've seen him do it. I'm going over here where I'm more comfortable, because I've seen that kid do it 9 out of 10 times, and I've only seen this kid do it 1 out of 10 times. And I think when people start talking about getting under recruited, a lot of times players are not either playing against talent who they can truly be evaluated against, because I could be playing just in any tournament and go out and think I'm doing great, but who am I doing it against? Or I'm never put in that situation. So therefore, it doesn't add up. I have to be able, as a college coach, whether it's being on film or in person, have to see you where I see you. Okay, you're going to probably be a combo. I need to be able to, one, see you shoot it effectively. I also need to be able to see you handle the ball and make solid decisions with it. So it's twofold in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said it, you've already said it before. Again, matchups matter, and, who are you playing against? Because anyone can score 30 against me.
Even for me going to high school games, because I'm sure some people will say, okay, well, you hadn't seen us play or this or that. I'm not making a high school schedule. But I know teams who...
Yeah, and that's a tough one when you're talking about the high school, because the players have no control over.
They have no control over that, and the high school coaches have the responsibility of putting together a schedule that they think is going to help build up their team to get to the point where they want to. The end game is to be playing in March. If you're playing in mid-March, right before spring break, you've done your job. Or the closest you get to it, then you've done your job. So the high school coaches have the responsibility of building up their schedule. Obviously, they can't just load it up and just crush kids' confidence or just go out and go play against whoever and then not see kids in situations that they're going to see in the regular season, in district play. They have to be able to see that. And those are the good programs when you talk about your Reagans, your Clarks, your Wagners, your Westlakes. They're all looking at big picture. Where am I going to see my kids at? Antonian does a great job of that. They know that, hey, there may be some ups and downs in our district schedule, but prior to that, we're going to go play X, Y, and Z. We're going to go play in this tournament, and we're going to see exactly where we're at. So in February, when we're playing for a potential state championship, we're not in awe when we see 6'7", 6'8", or 6'9" come out of the locker room and figure out how we're going to match up with that. No, they have an idea already.
Mm-hmm. Nice. All right. And then we were, I know I'm kind of going back and forth, but on that Brennan game, Brennan and Steele, just to wrap that up, to give a shout out to some of the leading scorers there was Camden had 17 that game.
Cam Calgill.
Kingston had 15 that game.
225s that are playing really well right now. Not surprised though.
And then Big Dion had 8 points before he left that game.
Yeah.
So that was good for for Steele versus Brennan. I guess from the Spurs tournament, was there anything?
John Paul, who was in the same pool we're talking about. So you have Colleen Shoemaker, who we talked about, Antoine Gonzalez going on the run that he went on. Steele, Brennan, John Paul, all in the same pool, having to play against one another. John Paul is ahead in the Brennan game. John Paul is ahead in the Steele game. Probably should have beat both of them. They lose to Shoemaker by double digits. So they go 0-3. But their roster dictates them playing against in those games. And they're winning because Matt Cuellar, Desmond Dudley, Peyton Reimer, Javon, who's an outstanding 6'4" defender, shutdown type kid. And so they're able to play against those rosters.
Javon Adams, he's probably a little taller than 6'4".
With about a 6'7", 6'8" wingspan. So then on the flip side of that, they played Clemens this past Monday or Tuesday. In my eyes, Clemens is a playoff team. They beat Clemens. Now, granted, Clemens is not what Clemens is going to be in January. Clemens will be a different team in January. Big-time transfer, Nakar Ejihan, 6'8", 2022, going to be a big factor in that district. Going to get good guard play from Jameer Dudley. And they have another kid that I really like. Drawing a blank on him, it'll come to me.
Over at Clemens?
Mm-hmm.
I know the two you mentioned, and that's I'm not too familiar with their whole roster.
But outside of that, so they beat Clemens the other night in a very tough physical ball game. In a very tough physical ball game that I think they will play deep into their portion of the playoffs when that comes around in TAPS 4A. They'll see teams like Westbury Christian, Concordia Lutheran out of Houston. They'll see teams of that nature that they match up well against. So it'll be interesting. So when you start talking about teams that were actually in that tournament, I've seen John Paul, in summer league, in fall league, and
this is the roster for Clemens.
Yeah,
I don't know if you see that name.
Theo Grant. Theo Grant is the kid at about 6'3", 6'4", can score the basketball. So I mentioned him along with Dudley and then Nakari Ejihan. And then, Coach Bell, took over that position last year. Interesting year to take it over in, and the fact that, COVID kicks in. And so you can't really implement everything because you have so many other different factors that are going on. From kids, getting COVID to having to miss games, so many other different things. But they were a game or two from winning the district last year, which changes up everything last year. Judson wound up winning the district last year, but a game or two that they lose and a couple of heartbreaking results changes everything. And so now you get Theo Grant, you get Dudley with playoff experience, some other additions that we talked about with Nakari Ejihan. That's an interesting group. So with that being said, John Paul beat them, which says a lot about that program in itself. I've seen them, in fall and in the summer and doing some other different things. So you could kind of see, I think you were at a couple of those contests, so you could start to see that team kind of gain confidence. So it's not a surprise that they're beating who they're beating or playing close who they're playing close.
I like the JP2, John Paul 2 squad. Their coach, Forrest, and just the whole, atmosphere and mood of the team.
Team feeds off of his energy. I agree.
Just a fun group. You mentioned Desmond Dudley, Matt Cuellar.
Matt Cuellar is a matchup problem because he's so skilled, and especially at the high school level, you have to figure out how you're going to play him. And so when you slide over at 6'6", some teams have tried to play him, just with a traditional big kid who can't move their feet, where he's going to score the ball on them. Then you match him up with somebody smaller, and he's just going to shoot right over the top of them. And so, he's an interesting kid. And, we talked about Javon Adams, starting to come into his own, how well he's starting to play on the inside and what he does defensively against other teams, best players. I mean, he has some shutdown ability, which kind of slows the game down for them and gets them extra opportunities, to take advantage of it. So it's interesting. Teams have a tough time, trying to figure them out. Sometimes it may be too late for what they're trying to do. So those are some interesting teams, as we had talked about. Being able to see there. Another team that was not in that tournament, they were actually in that same weekend. I kind of want to touch on that because I was able to get over on that, is Harlan.
Yeah, I heard a lot about them. So please, we can move on from the Spurs tournament now and kind of move on to this other event. Where did you see Harlan at?
So I saw them in the Northside Northeast Independent School District tournament, which we talked about. So KJ Lewis, arguably one of the top 23s in the country, was actually in that event playing with El Paso Chaplain. So he's in that event. He's a special talent. They wound up playing against Johnson. on that Saturday. Got off to a slow start, but being the player who he is, kind of settled in and really started to make plays, make shots from multiple areas on the floor. I mean, he's every bit as advertised, kind of seeing the maturation process of this one kind of coming up. And for him to kind of stay poised and under control while he's struggling a little bit and get others involved until he kind of got himself going, says a lot about him. But
so you got to see KJ Lewis play?
Saw him, and it was good to kind of see that team in itself, because they'll be a playoff team. I think they went 2 or 3 rounds deep last year, and they're not a bad group. So Johnson is in a dogfight with them. But like I said earlier, Johnson playing without their best player in Kendall Dow, still a close ball game for about maybe 3.5 quarters, getting good production out of Darryl Banks, Rizzo, and a couple of other kids, that they have. The Amsler kid is playing really well for them. So they're doing some really good stuff. Over at Johnson, they're trying to build something, with a young group that they have. But going to Harlan, they can beat you multiple ways. So for them, they're playing against Clark. They played against Clark the other day in a hot contest. But in that particular tournament, they wound up playing against Jefferson, who is very talented. Jefferson has 2 really, really good guards. And Joseph Rincon and Aaron San Miguel. Both of them can score in a variety of different ways. Very crafty, doing what they do. And so they kind of jumped out on Harlan and kind of surprised them a little bit. But Harlan plays 10 or 12 kids, and they just kind of just wear you down. The engine that helps that train go is 2024 Kalen Hargrove. Very athletic point guard, gets out, defends you, 94 feet, just kind of just make you work. But also make really good reads. He understands the game, really sees the floor, really high IQ, love his court vision, loves how he passes the basketball and get others involved. Another 2024 who's really solid for them, Roman Chase, doing some really good things.
I'm glad to hear he's coming. I've known about, Roman for about a year or so. So I'm glad to hear he's actually maybe doing some things.
Starting to really settle down, knock down shots, and really understand how to play, not just from a shooting aspect, but have seen him make a couple of hustle plays. But the kid who has really kind of put them or everyone on notice is Ashawn Holmes. Ashawn Holmes looks really good. I mean, he's playing off the bounce, getting to his spots, raising up, knocking down mid-range shots, hitting a 3, really gritty, really, really gritty defensively, gets after it a little bit, and then they're getting some decent play, from Trey Pullins. He's doing some decent things. They're waiting to get Jaron Hall back, which from my understanding, they got him back over the weekend.
Was he injured or something?
Actually was out a little bit, with cold flu-like symptoms. So, they're just trying to be safe, but bring him back. And he's playing really well. They split up in Houston, where I was I didn't see them play in Houston, but I was there early in the week to see a couple of other teams play. But in the Clark game, saw them kind of go back and forth. When we start talking about playoff teams, Celestine is one of the best. And he's got a really, really good guard in Jordan Mason, Texas State signee. Was off to a really good start, got in some foul trouble, wound up fouling out late in that game. And it wound up the foul he committed, wound up being the game winner, because Harlan goes to the line and makes free throws to win that one. So they're really getting good play from him as well. And then they're getting good play from Ryan Garza. Ryan Garza's knocking down shots as well. So you have Jaron Hall, Ryan Garza, Roman Chase, Kalen Hargrove, and Ashawn Holmes. So those 5 alone.
That's just guards.
And then you got Jalen Gordon comes off the bench. And like I said, Trey Pullins is doing some different some
Zach?
decent.
We haven't mentioned Zach Crawford.
Zach's brings a physical presence to that group.
He's
he's coming along. Yes, he is. Yes.
This past weekend or whatever.
Yes. So, he's one that is provides him a physical presence, control the glass and does some other good things. And so they have a good mix. They have a good feel about what they want to do. The kids know what they want to do. You talk the same thing about Coach Blackwell over at John Paul. I would say the same thing for Coach Taylor and Coach Hall over at Harlan, about the kids kind of feeding off of their energy.
Good vibes.
Yes, absolutely. They get after it a little bit. And so, really good group to kind of be around and really kind of watch flourish. They fly around, make a lot of plays, and so makes that district really interesting. So we talked about Brennan already. We talked about Warren already.
Real quick on Harlan. Talk to me just about their roster is deep. I mean, you listed like 10 guys, but they only have 5 guys that start. So who's their starting 5? And let's just talk about maybe that group and what makes them strong. Like, just kind of narrow it down. I know. Like
starters that I've seen. Yeah, make me go to my notes.
I know,
but Kalen Hargrove.
Okay.
Ashawn Holmes. Ryan Garza. Trey Pullins. And then at times it could be Jaron Hall, or it could be a couple other kids. I would actually have to see the entire roster, but they have that type of flexibility with the team to where it could be a matchup type situation where another kid starts on the others. But when you start talking about, again, who really kind of makes them go, Kalen Hargrove makes them go just with his defensive intensity and his ability to kind of guard the ball multiple divisions. Although his size, he can guard multiple positions because of his athleticism and his IQ, and knowing what other teams may be trying to do kind of helps him out, quite a bit.
So Kalen and Ashton at guards, kind of. Ashawn, my bad. And I know he's been doing good, and for some reason I just haven't really known that much about him until recently. But
young group, but starting to really kind of understand roles, and that's important. When you have a young team, sometimes everybody's out to try to hurry up and be the guy. You don't always have to be. Sometimes it's important to just stay within yourself, allow coaches to dictate roles. And I think that's kind of what's going on right now. They kind of understand now Coach Hall's philosophy about, I need you to do this or I need you to do that in order to be successful. So I think that's kind of where they're at right now from a mentality. And that, of course, not on their sideline. I'm looking at it from afar, but you can kind of just see kids kind of get comfortable.
That's good. Yeah, when you see teams getting a groove together and they cheer on their teammates and they're happy when the whole team is scoring and, cheering on from the sidelines, it's just a beautiful thing when you see the whole team vibing, and that team chemistry is so important.
Absolutely. All
right. Well, so that was Harlan. That event was the Northeast side tournament.
Correct.
Did you have? I didn't go to any of the games at that event. So was there any other?
So Brandeis actually, like I was saying earlier at the beginning of the show, should have won the tournament. They're up 3 and in a hard-fought game against Houston Straight Jesuit, who has Jace Posey on there, a couple of other kids on there that are college-level prospects. But Brandeis is well in control. They miss a couple of easy ones. Then Straight Jesuit has a kid that actually got hot, knocked down a couple of shots, and they go to the foul line. So it's a 3-point game. Straight Jesuit calls timeout after a made basket. Brandeis sets up their defense. Straight Jesuit sets up their offense. 3-point game, 7 seconds left. Everybody knows, don't do what? Don't give up a 3. He left the kid wide open. It happens, kids, lose focus on situations, but knowing Coach Gardner, he's going to get that right. Those are mistakes that you can make now that may be pivotal for you later on, in the sense that, okay, I don't make that same mistake. I might be up in a 3-point game, district ball game. I don't make that same mistake. What matters, a tournament game or a district game? Of course, the district game is what matters. So it's those learning lessons. What a young group. And everybody forgets that Brandeis last year finished the season with their young kids, because the majority of the older kids had gotten COVID or had been exposed, so they had to sit out. So they were 1 game away from actually making the playoffs. So if they get in, they draw a tough seed, but they also get their older kids back. So with that being said, those kids that were having to play later in the season now got that experience. And so they're getting some quality play from James Stahl, Andrew Byerly, Prezel Turner, who kids with Turner and Byerly both have size, 6'5", 6'6".
And
They
this is over
post
at
team
Brandeis.
So, Gardner being a perennial playoff coach 2 years ago was in the state tournament. So he was a recipient of a state championship for the simple fact that everything shut down when COVID first kicked off. He was set up to play Duncanville. So he's had teams go to the regional finals before. So he knows what he's doing. He knows the pulse of his teams. He knows what buttons to press. Seeing what I saw out of that group, they'll be there in the end when it matters in terms of trying to fight for a seed for playoffs. When we start looking at teams, you got Clark in that district. You have Reagan in that district. You have Brandeis. Speaking with a couple of coaches, Lee is going to have something to say in that district. They have a couple of interesting players. Then, of course, we talked about Johnson already. So that'll be interesting. So that district there, they kick off in a couple of weeks. And so it's going to be a fight starting from mid-December for them. Same thing over the North Side district.
Yeah. So I guess as far as basketball that's coming up right now, today we're sitting at November 28th. Also, I got a message from Coach.
Go ahead.
Coach John Smith, and he said he's playing San Antonio Brennan there's a Marble Falls tournament this week, I guess.
So they'll have the Marble Falls tournament. They not only have that, they have the South Sand tournament that's going on. I think next week is New Braunfels. So
that's right. So next weekend, and you mentioned South Sand, so I'm looking at my calendar right now. So you're right. So starting on Thursday,
yes,
December 2nd is when the South Sand tournament kicks off. But I guess there's also a Marble Falls tournament going on as well.
Yes.
So what's going on next week? What's going on this week?
Tournament Central all over again. So you went through week 1, week 2, and week 3, where everybody's kicking their seasons off. Where some teams, UR rules dictate how many games you can have in a week and also in a season. So for schools, they're trying to get more bang for their buck. So 3 games, a tournament constitutes 2 games. So you may have some teams that want to just get 2 games on a Friday, Saturday format and be done with that and bundle that into what they would call their tournament weekend based on who they're going to be playing. Or some teams just go and jump into what you've seen in the previous weeks in a Thursday, Friday, Saturday situation. So again, going back to whatever the coaches, feel is best for their team. So for the next 2 or 3 weeks will be more tournaments. Some will kind of peel back because, like I said, some districts are getting ready to start. So they may play in one more tournament just to try to get one more good quality look before peeling everything back to make sure everybody's healthy, everybody's solid, and they put in everything they're going to put in going into district play. Because most good coaches, most good programs are still withholding a lot of stuff. Have to, just from scouting purposes. You got coaches filling the gym up, trying to get last-minute information, making sure that they see the teams that they're going to be playing against in the district play. But you got some coaches that are holding on to stuff that they feel like are going to give them an advantage, whether it be a lineup or a couple of sets, out-of-bounds look or whatever. That's just a fun time of year that's going on right now where everybody's kind of, playing chess and checkers.
Yeah, and it's funny because, it's just, part of the game, studying the game. At these tournaments and stuff, when you look in the audience, you see all the other coaches from all the schools watching the game, but I'm sure taking notes as well.
Absolutely.
But that's good. All right. So a lot of tournaments coming up this week. As I look at my calendar.
Yeah, so I have to touch on, I went to Jim Hicks's RCS Hoops Giving event on Wednesday. So day before Thanksgiving, he brings in a slew of teams. He held it over at Houston Christian in Houston there. So Wagner was there from the area. They had taken some lumps. They had been in some close games, but they've only really played one in the area. And this is the crazy thing about them. And they played an overtime game against Antonian, which Antonian wound up winning. And Antonian, like I said, is a really, really good team. They're 10-0 right now. with a solid group and solid coaching staff. So Wagner has played a total of 4 or 6 games, maybe even 7 games out of the area. 4 in Dallas, 2 or 3 in Houston. So they're starting to gain a little bit of confidence. They were able to beat a really good Cy Ranch team. Cy Ranch has 4 legitimate college prospects on there. Well, actually, 1 is already signed. They have 3 others that will probably will at some point in time. Austin Nunez has a big game against them. Kevin Garcia has a big game against them. Eddie Fernandez has a really big game against them defensively, because some of what Wagner's having to do is kind of figure out who can do what, much like what everybody else is doing. So defensively, we saw him doing a lot of the heavy lifting on the defensive side, which allowed everybody else to kind of do what they needed to do. As a whole, Coach Clark's trying to figure it out, is getting those kids to play really hard. They have to play hard to play for him, and they have to be able to accept hard, tough coaching. And they're responding. Austin Nunez is definitely the best 22 in the area, and he's starting to really play like it. It's not only just from a ranking or a where he signed at. It's justified. Starting to really understand pace, really starting to understand the leadership role. Everybody else is following their roles and taking on to his leadership, and he's also taking on the role of having to be that guy. Before seeing Austin, you would see him in multiple roles, whether it be having to score the ball quite a bit, or facilitating role, or just another guy that can just really kind of just knock down shots. So we've seen him in multiple different roles. Now he's really kind of evolving into a complete player. He's starting to figure out what he has to do defensively. He's being more vocal. But offensively, his pace, it's tough to deal with. I mean, he's getting in traffic, finishing, but his ability to get space and then knock down shots, he's starting to do it on a more consistent basis. It makes him a tough guard. It makes him very tough in that district, like we were talking about earlier with Clemens. Should be a playoff team. Wagner will be one if everybody stays healthy, because they have guys that put so much pressure on you defensively and that you have to game plan for. Kevin Garcia, very underrated, underappreciated in multiple areas. He gets it in multiple spots, can score the ball, but then also makes good decisions. Having to do a lot of heavy lifting against bigger, more athletic, but still trying to figure out a way. So they are very intriguing.
And he's pretty much the big man for Wagner, right?
If you want to say that, I mean, but they, like I said, they fly around, they play hard. So
they don't really have a big man.
There you go. There you go. And, you know, he's arguably the second or third best shooter on the team. So you can't necessarily say that. So, I mean, it's an interesting group to follow and see. This area has a lot of really, really good basketball players, really good coaches. I love the fact that they put their kids in the best possible situation. Just being a part of it, being able to sit and talk with some of those guys and see what they're thinking, and then see it, you know, kind of come into fruition on the floor, you know, is really, really good. Really, really good. We have a lot of really good coaches and players in this area that in some regard are getting recruited, some aren't, but we'll see at the end of the day. They're saying the state of Texas is the new Mecca. I mean, you know, San Antonio is a big part of it.
Yeah.
Austin is a big part of it. There's a lot of good kids in this particular area.
Yeah, a lot of good basketball here in Texas and in this area.
Mm-hmm.
So awesome. Well, so Wagner, they've been playing a lot out of town. They haven't really played that many San Antonio schools other than maybe Antonian, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it'd be interesting to see once Wagner starts playing in town and in district, and, you know, see some of the matchups,
Mm-hmm.
You know, here locally. That'll be fun to watch.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, it'll definitely be interesting to see. East Central will get some kids out of football. You know, they played 2 or 3 rounds deep into football. They're getting some kids into the mix of that. So they potentially will be a factor. They have a really good 2024 on their group. Some young freshmen that play on that group.
Talk to me about Will Nathaniel.
Needs to be more consistent. Good player, hard nose, needs to be more consistent.
For East Central, though, he's probably their leading from a size standpoint. And is he? I mean, I know there's some other good guards there. The two brothers that play there, big fans of them. But as far as the guy, I'm not saying 5-star ranking guy, but I'm saying for East Central, he's kind of the staple, isn't he? Because he's big. He's one of the bigger guys. And
he provides athleticism. He provides size, like you alluded to, that in high school could be tough to deal with because sometimes, he may be able to move people off of their spots a little easier than others. But you talked about the brothers. I mean, it gets interesting when you talk about those two for the simple fact that they're both athletes. They both jump out of the gym. Younger brothers, really the one on that team for me.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And I've seen him play. I saw him play at your event.
Yeah.
And I was very impressed with the younger brother. Names are drawn to blank, but so that's cool that he's the one on that team. That's good.
Yeah.
I just I've seen Will play over the past few years just on AAU stuff and all that. So I kind of know him a little bit. And it's good to kind of see him growing and developing. And I saw him play at the Spurs tournament, so I got to see him there at the AT&T Center and do some things. So, but yeah, like you're saying, still a little bit of work that needs to be done. But if he can be more consistent and grab those loose balls and put it in the bucket, I mean, he would be a solid.
Absolutely. So when we we're kind of winding down on time. If we want to just kind of touch on some names.
And you can wind this out.
Teams. We talked about it on a previous show. We talked about how well they played in the fall. We talked about how well some of their players played in the summertime, but Somerset's for real. Was able to watch them on film a little bit, just based on conflicts of schedule. So a lot of times, if I can't get to a game that I definitely want to see or need to see for evaluating purposes, I'll get film and see it. And so I was able to see them against Veterans Memorial. Veterans Memorial is a solid group. They have some solid prospects on that particular team, but Christian Rodriguez, double machine.
Their big man.
Shane Pareles.
Definitely a scoring guard that can.
Matt Soto. So we talked about it in the previous episode about Shane Pareles being a first-team all-district kid in a 6A district. Now,
Lost the feed when you were talking about Somerset.
So Somerset,
Christian
and their ability.
Rodriguez.
So we talked about Christian Rodriguez. We talked about Matt. We talked about Shane Pareles. So before we cut out, I talked about Shane Pareles being a kid that first-team all-district comes over from a 6A district. Then you have Matt Soto, who knocks down shots from multiple areas on the floor, but then also evolving into a solid point guard, understands roles of his teammates. And then you have Christian Rodriguez, who just understands space and understands where to be and how to get it done. Last year, this time I was watching him because they played in our fall showcase, and I watched him have to do some of the heavy lifting, but he was getting pushed around a little bit. He's not getting pushed around as easily anymore.
Who's this?
Christian Rodriguez.
Okay. He put on a little bit of size to go with his 6'6".
Not only that, he just kind of
frame.
understands now how to play. I mean, he's still long and lean, but he understands how to deal with that now. He's gotten stronger. He's not necessarily bulked up, but he's gotten stronger. Still understands how to finish around the basket, still understands spacing. So even if he has to pop out, he's knocking down the mid-range or even hitting the three. And then he's rebounding the ball. So Somerset is a legitimate threat to go to state and potentially win it all. It's hard when
and this is 4A?
Mm-hmm. People talk about other regions. So they talk about Yates, they talk about other teams, coming out of Region 3, Region 2. I've seen them, and they may have one or two individuals, but they don't have the collective unit that Somerset has. So when you start talking about what Cole has done in the past with their unit, the fact that they were so cohesive, all on the same page, talk about what Antonian has done 2 out of the last 3 years winning state championships, Somerset could be in that equation. Only time will tell, but they are that good, well coached from what I saw on film. I mean, they can beat you multiple ways. And anytime you have that, you have a team that can play multiple rounds deep in the playoffs. I can beat you from the perimeter. I got multiple ball handlers. I got really good decision makers as a whole on my team. Everybody kind of buys into their role. They all love each other. It makes for a dangerous group. So, again, talking about the area in itself, a lot of really good basketball on all levels. So you have 3A Cole, you have 4A Somerset, you have 5A, you have Jefferson, who is really good. I mean, they played with 5 or 6 kids the other day, but tough. They're tough. Aaron San Miguel, Joseph Rincon, they put the ball in the basket and gave Harlan all they wanted. And we're talking about Harlan being a factor in the 6A. So you got 5A there. You got Bernie Champion. So
for the 5A in this region, you're saying.
But then not only that, looking at, because I was able to see Leander Glenn. They got a player in Trey Leak.
Which last year, Leander Glenn beat Bernie Champion real deep in the playoffs. Correct.
Wound up going to the state semifinals. So they're back, or will potentially be back, so they will be a factor in that as well. So just seeing a lot of the different teams, and that's the other beauty of just getting up and down I-35 this past week, going up I-10, seeing various teams, seeing matchups and how they may unfold and who's going to match up with who, it's big.
Nice. Well, I know we talked a lot about basketball, and honestly, we could probably talk all night. But do you have any closing remarks? We'll do this again. We'll keep bringing more episodes, talking about basketball, talking about players, and just shining some light on, the hoops community. So you can close it out.
Just thankful for the opportunity. Most people won't sit back and talk about, kind of what they're thankful for. Kids need to be appreciative of the parents and everything that we as parents go through. So kids that are listening, coaches that are listening, obviously, they need to be recipients of the thoughts of being thankful for what they do, bring to the table. But it's a pleasure to cover the area. It's a pleasure to see quality, good basketball. It's definitely a pleasure to see college level prospects evolving and taking the game to the level of where it's going. People keep alluding to the fact when they see Duncanville doing the things that they're doing and other teams in Dallas and other teams in Houston, that Texas is a new Mecca. I've always felt like that from an underdog standpoint for quite some time. It's being proven now against other states, but now people are really starting to see, and it's migrating to this area where people are starting to see a lot of quality basketball.
Yeah, I agree. And on the topic of giving thanks, we got a lot to be thankful for. I know Thanksgiving was earlier this week and a lot of friends and family time. So, we're thankful for the sport, and, hopefully some of these players are thankful for some of the stuff that that we do just because we love it. Number one, we love doing what we do. But at the end of the day, man, we're trying to help these kids get scholarships. We're trying to help their families save money by getting scholarships. We're trying to help coaches save time by finding good players and helping them do some of that research. So really everybody's benefiting, know. And we got a lot to be thankful that we're able to do that. So
absolutely.
Thankful for the friendships and thankful for our friendship too, man. So
absolutely. Yeah. Be on the road this week. So I will be ironing out my schedule later on this evening and tomorrow, trying to figure out where I will be. I will be touching South Sands tournament quite a bit. I know they have several groups that are coming in that traditionally come in. That's always a really good event to go to. We'll definitely be seeing New Braunfels tournament. Pflugerville's got a really good tournament that's coming up here in the next week or so that I'll be at as well.
Yeah, as far as me, I know I'm going to be catching a game tomorrow over at Roosevelt. I'm going to be catching a game on Tuesday. Harlan plays against Smithson Valley. On Tuesday, I'll be at that game, Harlan versus Smithson Valley. And then, like we mentioned before, starting on Thursday is when the South Sand tournament and other tournaments kick off. So I'm sure we'll be around.
All right.
All right. Thanks for
Stay
tuning
safe.
in.
See y'all soon.